Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by Helena Foulkes, who is a former executive at CVS and is currently running for Governor of Rhode Island in the 2022 Democratic primary. Helena, how are you today?
Great, Raymond. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. My first question here, you're running for governor in 2022, seeking the Democratic nomination for the state's top office. Why do you want to be the next governor?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Providence. I'm the oldest of five kids. I love this state. I spent almost my whole life here. And right after school, I came back and spent 25 years at CVS. I started at the ground floor. I had my first job was helping make sure all the Christmas and Easter merchandise could fit in the stores. And over that time, I had four children very quickly. And when my youngest was just one, I found out that I had cancer. And one of the reasons I'm running is that I realized honestly how fortunate I was at that time in my life, because I had really good health insurance and I got paid time off to take care of myself. And I know that there are far too many Rhode Islanders who are really just one bad experience away from being in a tough situation. So I think about that every day. And I got to, over the course of my career, have a lot of exciting opportunities. I helped drive many innovations. I worked with great people. Probably the thing I'm most proud of is the decision I got to lead to get us out of the cigarette business. So we were the first drugstore in the country, and still the only, to get rid of tobacco. And it was really hard because at the time we were doing $2 billion a year in sales. And I think what it taught me is that people can do hard things. You know, we got a great group of people around the table. We were better because of the different perspectives. And we did something very hard, which had a great impact on our organization and made all of us feel proud. And for me, it was very personal because my mother had died of lung cancer 5 years before. So I'm running in many ways because of that experience and realizing that with my leadership skills, I do know how to pull people together to get hard things done. And I think that's what the state needs right now. You know, I look at us coming out of COVID with so many people still struggling. You know, a lot of women are still not back in the workforce. A lot of people of color are still financially struggling, and others in the community. And at the same time, we have this tremendous opportunity ahead of us, which is billions of dollars coming our way from the federal government. And I really want to make sure that we spend that money wisely and we're setting ourselves up for a great next decade, one where everyone can live a great life, whatever that life is meant to be for them is what I'd love to be able to do for the people in the state of Rhode Island. And I think what's unique about me is I think a lot of politicians make promises, but I'm a leader who gets things done. And I think that's what Rhode Islanders really want right now. And so the three things that I'm focused on are education, affordability, and the economy. And I could tell you more about those, but I'll pause too, just to make sure that I'm tracking the way you want to go in the interview, Raymond.
That actually plays off into what I want to focus on next, because you had recently, one of the top issues in the state right now is housing, especially for this election cycle. You had recently released your platform on housing. Can you explain for those watching a little bit about what your plans are to address the housing crisis as governor?
Sure. Yeah. And I think as context, one of the stories that always resonates for me is a teacher in his 60s who I met early on in this campaign, who said to me, you know, Helena, I bought my first house 40 years ago, and it cost me about 2 times my salary. And today I have 3 sons who all want to buy homes in Rhode Island, and it will cost them 5 times their salary. And he said, I'm really worried that our kids are getting priced out of the state. And, you know, Raymond, I look at you and your generation. We want all of you to be able to have great futures here. So part of that is being able to afford to live here. And I think the fundamental problem from a housing perspective is that we have short supply. We're about 20,000 units short. And if you look at Rhode Island over the last decade, we've created the least supply of new homes per capita of any state in the country. So we really have to figure out how we increase supply in the long run, but in the short run, take care of people who are struggling. So in the short term, the thing I would do is make sure that we have an overwhelming effort to make sure that anyone who is close to eviction gets the support they need. So I've been talking to faith leaders and community leaders who really know who people are in their communities who need support. And just last year, we got $200 million from the federal government to make sure that people weren't evicted from their homes. And to date, we've spent just under half of that money. So we have a lot of money left to help people. And I want to make sure the people who need it get that help. In the medium term, I would say that I want to encourage people to live in multi-unit housing. We know that this is a densely populated state, and that's where a lot of the affordability issues come. So I'm proposing a $500 tax credit for anyone who lives in multi-unit housing. And then in the long run, I want to create more supply. And so I have a lot of ideas on that, but two ideas specifically. One would be to generate a $160 million housing bond to make sure we increase supply and create incentives. But also, I love something that I've seen in Massachusetts and California that's working, which is creating accessible dwelling units. And think about this is if an older couple, let's say, has a home, it's really too big for them. They don't want to move out altogether, though. They would be allowed to build a smaller house, a much smaller unit on the property, and move into that smaller unit and then rent out the big house to family members or someone else. It's a really great way to increase supply. It's working very well, as I said, in other states. So all of these are programs that people could find on our website. And I think they give you a sense that I don't just talk about housing as a crisis, but have really concrete plans. And I think that's where my business background helps me, because as I said to you before, I want to get stuff done. I really want this to be a situation where I can help people and get them into housing that makes sense for their lives.
One of the other top issues facing our state that your business background may help with is rebuilding the state's economy. As all the states head out of this, I guess the post-COVID era, as we head into more of like an endemic, now it's going to be rebuilding the economy to go back to what it was pre-COVID. In what ways would you go about rebuilding Rhode Island's economy if elected?
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think this fits with what I said before about making sure that this is a state where everyone can build a great future. And part of having a great future is knowing that you have a career path. So I have a lot of ideas on this, but I would say to simplify it, one of the things that I hear very consistently is when I talk to the business community is they've got a lot of great open jobs that they're really hoping people can join companies like Electric Boat or Torrey, a lot of companies who are seeking people who don't necessarily have college degrees, but they can train them up. But there are a lot of barriers that get in the way of people getting access to those great jobs. And that could be anything from transportation barriers. You know, if you look at cities like Woonsocket and Pawtucket and Central Falls, how do we make sure that RIPTA is getting people from those communities to these great paying jobs so that people can have access to them? Another one I hear a lot about is childcare and making sure that parents can have their kids taken care of, again, so that they can get to jobs. And then just great workforce training. You know, this is something Rhode Island has been on the leadership of, but we could do even more. So one of the things I'm proposing is that we double our investment in career and technical education. But that's kind of what I see as the opportunity to help people get access to great jobs. And then along with that, I'd love to invest in the sectors of the economy where we already have strength. And I think the best example of that is what people call the blue economy. And essentially what that means is anything connected to the ocean. And we are the ocean state. So we should be the leader in the country in all things related to, for example, defense. We have the Naval War College, which is doing a lot of really cool things underwater. We've got aquaculture. We've got University of Rhode Island with their School of Oceanography. We've got great things that are fun jobs and fun careers for people. So I'd love to keep investing in those sectors so that people can have really, really great jobs. I think that would make me most proud is if, you know, people like you, Raymond, said, this is an amazing place to live, because I know I have so many career options ahead of me. And I have a lot of other ideas, but that just gives you a sense of things.
Yeah, and the rebuilding the economy is just one part of the whole issue. Another one, despite me saying that we're kind of in the post-COVID phase, it looks like we're kind of in the endemic where there's going to be spikes, you know, as the weather gets cold, kind of possibly like a year, like how the flu is every year, and getting control of the situation with COVID is a top priority amongst all the candidates. I know yourself included, have a lot of the candidates have criticized the way Governor McKee has handled COVID. What would you do differently as governor?
Yeah, I think, look, it's been really hard and people are so sick of COVID. It's almost like we don't want to talk about it anymore. But I would say the thing that I bring, I would say, is just I know how to manage a lot of complexity. I manage 200,000 people in 10,000 stores. So you always had to be anticipating what could go wrong and using data. And I think if I have any criticism, it's that, especially if you go back to November, we saw data that suggested that COVID was returning, and we really ignored that data. So I think that's a big part of how I lead. The other thing that's really special about my experience, and I'm really lucky in this, is I understand healthcare. I grew up in a healthcare company, so I know how amazing it is to have a workforce of nurses, for example, where you can keep building great futures. I understand how to build a healthcare system that works for everyone. And I think that's one thing we really uncovered in the middle of COVID is not only do we have a broken hospital system, because if you look at the failed merger of those two big hospitals, I think that was a missed opportunity, but we don't have enough care happening close to home. So right in people's communities or in their schools, having access to clinics where they could get screenings and tests and all the things that keep them out of the hospital. And I think really well-designed systems are proactive that way. And that's something I'd love to bring to the state.
Shifting gears to vehicle-related legislation, a big controversy in the state was the truck tolls. Sounds like they're here to stay. This is more of a shorter question. Where do you stand overall on the truck tolls in Rhode Island?
Yeah, look, I would say that when I'm governor, I'd like to be able to look at everything much more closely. But in general, I think the truck tolls are working right now in the sense that they're really providing the funds that we need to make sure that our bridges and roads are in great shape.
A big concern with the truck tolls is and I know the speaker was very adamant when he said this, that it's not going to go to cars. But what he what he left out was that it could, if the General Assembly were to pass the legislation on it, if elected governor, can you assure Rhode Islanders that you wouldn't extend the tolls to cars?
Yeah, I don't think we need to be thinking about increased revenue at this point, especially for people who already have really high costs of transportation. I spoke about that before. Owning a car is really expensive. We have high cost of insurance, gas is going up. So adding more burden to consumers, I think, doesn't really make any sense.
Looking at another policy in your policy section, you want to end Rhode Island's voter ID law. Why?
Well, I think voting should just be so much easier. And when you look at other democratically controlled states in New England, Rhode Island's behind in voting rights. And that's something I care a lot about. I think if Raymond, I look at someone like you and I say to myself, my goodness, with an internet world that you live in, can you imagine in 10 years what voting should and could look like? It should be much easier. And, I grew up in a time where you could only go on Tuesdays. And, if I had childcare issues or I had to travel, I missed voting. So I want to think of a whole bunch of ways to make voting easier. And certainly one of them is connected to voter ID laws, just to make sure that if you forgot your ID that day, it doesn't mean you can't vote. And the simple fix there that a lot of states have is legislation which just says under perjury of high penalty, you're signing something that says, I am Helena Foulkes and therefore I'm voting. And that really does work in other states. So that's what I'm proposing for voter ID. But think of another really simple one that I think 22 states in the country have, and that is same-day registration. So, if we want to get more people voting, we've got to make it easier for them to come in and vote. We also want to make sure that people can vote on weekends leading up to our vote and make sure that it's just a whole lot easier. So I think that's a big opportunity for Rhode Island. We're not far enough ahead and we want to get more people involved in this process.
Whenever the conversation of voter ID laws comes up, typically you hear that it's restrictive. Some people will go as far as to even call them racist. I'm just curious because when you need an ID to buy a pack of cigarettes, you need an ID to buy alcohol, you need an ID to see an R-rated movie, even to cash a payroll check. When you said someone voting like me, I usually just go, here's my ID, vote, simple. So how is it strict to require IDs when you need it for almost every other aspect of society?
Yeah, I think it's just that there are situations where, it's that one day out of the year you got to vote. And if you don't have your ID, it's really a constitutional right we have for everyone in this country and in our state to be able to vote, to establish, to have their voice. And so I don't want to have something like that be a restriction. I really want people to be able to vote.
Final follow-up on the voter ID before we move on. If we have because in Rhode Island we have 2 weeks of early voting, would it still be restrictive with the 2 weeks early voting and a voter ID law?
Would we still, are our voting still restrictive? Yeah, they are. If you look at Connecticut and Massachusetts, some of those other ideas that I put out are still much more restrictive than these other democratically controlled states, like the same day registration. Automatically mailing ballots is another thing that many states are doing. We did it during COVID, but we're not keeping that up on a go forward basis. So I've got 8 different ideas on my website if anyone wants to go look, that I think really put us on the leading edge. And these are things we should all be proud of. We want to make sure everyone's voice is heard.
Moving on to these next few are going to be shorter form lightning round questions that are you for or against the shorter form ones? Okay. Charter schools in Rhode Island, there's a debate on if there should be an expansion of them. Are you for or against an expansion of charter schools in Rhode Island?
Well, we didn't get to, I know you want to do short form, but we didn't get to talk about education, which I'm super passionate about, and we can come back to that. But I am fine with extending charter schools. I think parents should have rights to send their kids where they want. But I will say, I think the way to solve our current COVID learning loss problem is to invest in overall public schools, including charter schools. But we have 128,000 kids in our state who go to traditional public schools and only 10,000 kids in charter schools. So I think the answer has to be much more comprehensive.
If elected governor, would you commit to ensuring the car tax is fully phased out on time?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a very good idea.
Are you for or against the legalization of marijuana in Rhode Island?
I'm for that.
This next one I'll allow a little bit of elaboration on. It pertains to two House bills and a Senate bill that were introduced. The two of the bills, what one does is it allows the city of Providence, in this case, to, I should say the municipality that the private college is in, to tax the property tax, because currently the private colleges like Brown University and PC, they don't pay property taxes. Another one taxes the endowment at a 2% rate, and that 2% tax revenue goes strictly to the public school district of that city or town. And these two bills, it sounds like one has bipartisan support, and what it may need is leadership and the governor to sign off on it. So say if you're elected governor, and this one, it doesn't have to be a yes or no, because I know there's a little bit of, my question, what I'm trying to ask is, would you support legislation like this?
Yeah, I'm glad this isn't a yes or no, because this is more complex. I mean, I think that Rhode Island benefits from amazing universities across the whole state. They make us richer. They attract great talent. They're providing a lot of resources that help businesses get started. So this is one I need to understand and look at more carefully. I want to make sure that we're supporting our universities, but we also have to be conscious of revenue sources. And as those universities are expanding and taking on more real estate in our cities, I think we do have to peel that back and say, what is the right balance that we strike so that we're open and welcoming to these universities and nonprofits, but at the same time, taking care of everyone living in the state.
Do you believe they at least should be contributing more to the cities and towns that they're in?
Yeah, and I think they're really trying to. I mean, I'm having conversations with people across different universities, and I think they're really proud of the work that they're doing. And I'd want to continue that dialogue and make sure that they're very much part of the partnerships that we build between universities, the public sector, for-profits. This is how we build a great state for the future.
And moving on to education, you had mentioned that you wanted to talk a little more about it. I actually did have it right after the lightning round, so funny how that worked out. So there's a lot. The issue of education, I always call it an umbrella topic with a lot of subtopics. There's multiple ways to go about reforming the state's education system, as well as even the cities and towns. What would be some of the educational reforms that you would propose as governor?
Yeah, I mean, this is my number one topic. If your viewers take nothing else away, I would like them to say Helena will be the education first governor. And I think that we're at a crisis. And just to give everyone a sense of why it's so important, today in our K through 12 classrooms, only 33% of our kids are passing their grade level reading tests and only 20% in math. So we have a real crisis. COVID learning loss has hit every kid in every zip code. Parents are very worried about it. And so I'm proposing we spend $1 billion in COVID learning loss and education in our state. And on the website, because I know you've checked it out, but I encourage others to, I've got it all laid out by detail, by year, it all adds up. And but just to give people the large chunks of it, I'm proposing we spend $500 million of the $1.1 billion we're getting from our ARPA dollars on COVID learning loss. And those would be in things like making sure you have before and after school learning. So I'd love parents to be able to drop their kids off from 7 in the morning till 7 at night if they needed that, and the kids can get learning. Summer learning loss. You know, we know our kids take a big step backwards. This would be a great opportunity. Making sure that every single school in the state has a mental health counselor. Making sure that K through 3 classrooms have teaching assistants where they really need an extra pair of hands. Making sure that our teachers who want to get ESL certified, where today it can cost them up to $10,000, can access that for free. So I could go on and on. There are all these programs as part of the $500 million that I think really could help us with COVID learning loss. Then we have another $300 million that we're proposing around school construction and making sure that we have a bond which allows our schools to be beautiful. And you know, where you show up every day says a lot, sends a message to students and teachers about how much we value them. So I'd love to be able to fix our schools. And then finally, the remaining $200 million, I'm hoping the federal government can take care of. If not, we'll have to find ways to pay for. But those would be things like universal pre-K and pre-K also for 3-year-olds. So I think we all know that when kids get access to school earlier, they perform better. And there's a lot of great things that come in their lives. There's actually studies that have shown it's a 10-to-1 on the investment. So when kids get into school early, they end up being really healthy, productive adults. And so I think that would be great. And it would allow us as a state to put ourselves on the leading edge of education. And, you know, one of the things over my career at CVS is I hired hundreds of people to come work at the company, which is based in Woonsocket. And I found most people, maybe 90% of the people we hired, ended up buying houses in Massachusetts because they wanted to take advantage of the good public schools. And then they drove 20, 30 minutes to work. So we missed all this revenue opportunity as a state by not getting these people to come here. So I think it's a virtuous cycle almost, that when we invest in education, we can attract more people in businesses, which increases our revenue and allows us to invest more in education. And that's really what Massachusetts has done in the last 25 years. They stuck with a program and they invested in their kids. And, you know, the last thing I would say about this is we want our kids in 8th, 9th grade and high school to have a sense of joy, you know, all along have a sense of joy, but to think about what are the careers that excite them and make sure that, you know, if it's going to college, great. But not everyone has to go to college. We can learn in 9th grade, you know, if you love the idea of being a carpenter, that could be a great career path. Why not learn it in your high school? And so I want to make sure, as I said before, we double the investment in career and technical education, because mostly I'd love kids to finish high school feeling like they know what their passion is and they know where they want to go in life. And I'm guessing you had that, Raymond, because you've had a successful already career, even though you're a young guy. So you got this passion early on, and that's a great thing. And I want to make sure every kid in this state has that.
Yeah, for me, it was like 10th grade / 11th grade. Speaking of investing in education, there are calls. This is typically usually from Republicans. They want school choice to be implemented, where the money would be invested where the students go, as opposed to the systems, and you wouldn't be, the parents wouldn't be limited to their child's educational opportunities based on their zip code. Do you have a stance on school choice?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I think we really need to be investing in our core public education system as it exists today. And, whether it's school choice or charter schools, I mean, those are things that on the edge, they're not going to affect enough kids. We've got to be fixing this for all 128,000 kids in our public schools. So that's where my focus would be.
My final question is a non-political topic. I ask everybody this one on the show to keep tradition, and that is, in your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
I gotta say our beaches, we're the ocean state, we have fabulous beaches. And when I travel across this country, everyone always says, oh, I've heard you have amazing beaches. That and probably our food. If I had a second choice, our food.
Absolutely. We have a great food scene here, especially in Providence. I'm a little biased because I'm a resident in Providence, and especially the beaches too. I'm looking forward to the warmer weather. Might finally go to one of them this summer. Helena, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to have you on.
Thank you so much, Raymond. I'm really glad you invited me.
And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click both the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.